And believe it or not, you know how everyone says, "Oh, I fell into trade. I had a degree in mathematics. I had a degree in." No, I went to college for international trade. And my dad and I talked about this. What are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, and he said, why don't you do international trade? And I said, well, I like the word international.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
All right, folks, we are on for another Simply Trade podcast. I've not met this person in some of the conferences. We were just talking about that off camera, and she can run circles around you and I, Lalo, put together, I think, easy, as far as her her intelligence here. So it scares. This is a little bit going to be a little intimidating on my part for a dumb country boy here to interview somebody of this caliber. But why don't you introduce our guest, folks? This is going to be a good one to listen to.
I'm very excited, like beyond excited, to bring her on because we just hired her as an employee here at Global Training Center. For a while now, we've been looking at bringing in what we call a subject matter expert, basically someone who knows everything. and I don't know, by the grace of God or something, we our paths crossed, and Renee, her name is Renee, and I know, Renee, I'm going to mess your name up. It's a really fun Italian last name, but I'm going to try to remember. Chiuchiarelli.
That's
so
perfect.
Hopefully I'm close. Oh, good. Okay. Renee Chiuchiarelli. And again, she has so many years in the business. I mean, we'll let her talk about that, because that's what this episode's going to be, more of a folks episode, that just getting to introduce her to the audience. She will, on occasion, I'm sure, will sit in and host some of our episodes, because she is, again, an employee here. And we're just so excited. She'll be teaching a lot of our courses as well, and pretty much setting the foundation of our education going forward, how we build our courses, how we build our curriculum and everything. So, but Renee, thank you for twice. I mean, for coming into our show and for joining our team here recently.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. You guys, that introduction was way, I don't know if I can build up to that, but you know what? Seriously, Lalo and Elsa, it was so funny. This was definitely a God shot, because I made a call to Chris Garcia, and he was like, well, why don't you email Elsa? And I was like, okay. So next thing you know, we're talking, and it was like you said, it was like a God shot. It was for me too. So I'm so grateful to be on the team at Global Training Center. Yeah. So my maiden name is Smith, just so you guys know. Isn't that hilarious?
Well, it's a simple name to this. Cucurelli, I guess, is how you. I got to tell you, I would bastardize that if I had not heard this already. Oh my gosh!
Well, I thought, this is a cool name. I'm keeping it, and plus, I have a daughter, so now I've been a Cucurelli longer than I was a Smith. But when we got married, it was so funny, because it was the Smith Cucurelli, and they're like, "What the heck? What's this girl doing?"
So everybody knows it. So everybody knows it's not Q. It's not spelled with a Q. It's like Chiuchia. So Chiuchiarelli. So that
Chiuchiarelli. Oh my God, perfect. You know what was awesome? It's 13 letters it's half the alphabet. It's 13 letters.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is. And, it is exactly.
Yeah, and so I actually got a lesson from Grandma Cucurelli how to pronounce it, and she asked me, "Are you Italian?" And I said no, and she shook her head, and she's like, and then finally, I said, "Well, at least teach me how to pronounce your name." Her and I just loved her. Her and I became so close, but so I had a lesson.
You know what? You love the seniors and all that, and especially Italians. Oh my gosh, the true Italian families are like such a heritage in there, and some great folks. So. Hey, folks, we've got a listener show coming up, and we need you to be on our panel.
We're actually going to make this our year-end, or one of our year-end wrap-up shows, and we really, really would like to hear from you.
Please let us know via LinkedIn and express your interest in that, and we're going to reach out to you so that we can get you on our show.
November 10th at 11 a.m. Central. We'd like to have you on our show.
Oh my gosh, the gnocchis and the ravioli.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we're just like, all right, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
How'd you get into the trade? Let's jump right into this. It's like you joined the Global Training Center, but what's the background? Where have you come from?
Well, you know what's awesome? I was born and raised in Michigan, and my first job was at the bridge, Port Huron and Sarnia. And believe it or not, you know how everyone says, "Oh, I fell into trade. I had a degree in mathematics. I had a degree in." No, I went to college for international trade. And my dad and I talked about this. What are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, and he said, why don't you do international trade? And I said, well, I like the word international because I wanted to travel, and meet cultures. And I didn't care about the trade. I was like, okay, international, that's cool. So anyway, I actually planned on doing this. And then I got out of the Gulf. I graduated during the Gulf War and there were no jobs. So I took this job in Port Huron and I made $6.50 an hour. I always tell my daughter I made $6.50 an hour. And I worked one midnight, 2 afternoons, and 1 day. I had no idea what I was doing. So this is how I get back to the training of this whole thing. I was like, so this lady worked across the hall from me and she told me she was a single mother and she had like 3 jobs. And I thought, holy cow, this is a crazy business because this is my introduction, right? And these truckers would come and tell me what to do. And so I ended up clearing a truck of sugar. And I had no idea what quota was until my boss called me the next day. And she was like, hey, by the way, I said, well, if I'd had some training, no. And then I ended up in the freight forwarding customs business for, 8 years. And that was crazy. I felt like I couldn't control anything because we were buying space from airlines, buying space from steamship lines. But I learned a ton. I started managing a warehouse and just a center out there for forwarding and importing. And then I ended up going into working for HoMedics in Michigan. You guys probably have had one of our massagers. The back massagers.
Yeah. I know exactly when you said HoMedics.
Exactly
I'm like, I know exactly the deal. Yep.
And I imported all that. No. But you know what? Here's a funny story about HoMedics. I don't know if I should. So you know how I don't know if you see how that's talking about spelling of names. The owners would get calls because it used to be HoMedics, right? And they ended up getting calls from people, from crazy people. Maybe we might have to edit this, but so they changed their name with a capital H, small o, and then Medics. So it became a medical company versus home. Right. So if you take the spelling, we were getting all these calls about products that were not ours, if that makes sense. Maybe we should. I can't say it out loud. I'll tell you guys later. But yeah, if you write it down, you'll see what I'm saying. So the small o became HoMedics. But we had some awesome customer service calls because people were calling us. But anyway, so. Well, the audience is going to write it down and figure this out.
I'm just not getting it.
You're just getting it? So we would literally, Andy, go into meetings and we'd have the customer service guy tell us all his calls for the day. It was hilarious. It was awesome. So that was the place where I did CT-PAD. I actually was in the pilot program in China, and it was so cool to go out to China, and we had Chinese and U.S. customs, and it was cool. So I learned a lot there. And then I ended up and then I was interviewing because things were getting a little bit crazy. And my boss, I ended up interviewing for a company in California, Teledyne, and my boss sent me a surf report. She's like, hey, with the offer, here's your surf report with my offer. So I was like, where do I sign up? And so I was 15 years ago, moved out here and started surfing. And that's so anyway, I'm kidding. I was working and surfing.
You need to, do you know who Amanda Barlow is?
I think I know the name.
She's about 6 feet tall or taller. She's a tall, dark-haired woman that she used to work with Roanoke for many, many years, and she just recently changed companies. But she lives in the Long Beach area, and she surfs. So that's somebody you need to make sure
that's about a 2-day drive from me, Andy.
Yeah, you Southern California is like everything it's the proverbial. It's not an expressway; it is a parking lot.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, and then through that whole career path, I was climbing the ladder. I ended up getting divorced, and I decided I had to, invest more in my career. So I started trying to move up the ladder. But during that whole time, I was teaching figure skating. And my daughter's a figure skater, and I became her coach.
Wow.
And I always...
hence Michigan, that's where that's coming from, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So I always wanted to be a teacher. I just really did. And the path just didn't work out. I had to provide, which was great too, because here I am today with this godchild with Lalo and Elsa. But when I started, moving up in the trade world, I obviously couldn't teach anymore because the demands got intense. I ended up moving to Raytheon and becoming their director. And Lalo mentioned we had like 35 people on our team, and I started to learn a lot more about the cross regulations of the State Department and the BIS and customs. And so that was a super interesting part of my career. So I've been able to do a lot of different things, but I always wanted to go back and teach. And here's the crazy story. So I ended up getting the original COVID in 2020, and I had some issues. It was a Mac Daddy for me. And I just started reevaluating everything, and I started reading this book, Happier. And it's by a guy in Harvard. His name's Tal Ben Shahal. I can't pronounce it. I'm sorry. I botched that. That's worse than Chiuchiarelli. But he wrote this book, and I started reading it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call Global Training Center. That's kind of how I ended up here. It's kind of a phenomenal story for me because I was able to get back to my roots and use this 30 plus years of forwarding, brokerage, defense, CTPAT, supply chain security. It's been awesome to, now I can apply maybe some of my practitioner skills in the teaching.
Well, I will say that, you mentioned Teledyne. I was like, during my FedEx career, I had a long career there, and I can remember meeting with the folks from Teledyne, with Raytheon several times, and streamlining processes. And from your perspective, when you were dealing with things, did you deal with regulatory and industry affairs type issues from Raytheon's perspective?
Yeah, we had a whole department that, did government affairs in DC, actually. So we would go to conferences, and they would, debrief or provide us feedback. My team actually just dealt with customs and border protection, but we cross-functionally dealt with global trade, which was our team that did, State Department clearances. And we lodged the licenses, and we got involved in all the craziness because we were trying to get it cleared, right? But Raytheon is more of a assembly line operation, right? We have very strict departments and these people become experts in that area. Yeah. But we had some crazy stuff at Raytheon. We just imported a couple planes, literal aircraft, which nobody had done. I couldn't believe it. And we were, with Pratt Whitney, We did a big merger, as you guys know, maybe 3 years ago with Pratt and Collins, and they hadn't even actually imported a plane. We were like, so, and we're sending stuff to Ukraine, and there's all kinds of exemptions, and it's so interesting at Raytheon because it's stuff you never do. So out of the ordinary. Yeah.
Well, but it comes down to again, with all of that, there's a common sense approach, and then you start looking at the exemptions and and that's where that proficiency comes into play, where you've got to have some people become experts in a specific area, because in my opinion, it is really unrealistic for anybody to think that they're going to become a super expert on so many different things. You're a jack of all trades. So the point being is, as things come up, you got to know where to research as far as to find the answer. But what helps is the proficiency in finding that answer is when you have people in your staff that develop an expertise in a specific area, dealing with aircraft, dealing with parts, dealing with electronics, dealing with, FDA or agriculture, or whatever the case may be. But
yeah, we had a lot of ATF.
Oh yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. I was new to ATF. I had done some FDA, but I was new to ATF.
So when you went to Raytheon, did you what position did you come in at an entry level type scenario, or did you middle management or what?
Middle management. I came into Raytheon as middle management, and at Teledyne I was their corporate import person, so I kind of was corporate compliance. And then at Raytheon, I went into middle management. They actually sent me to Boston for about a year. So I worked in Boston. I love the Boston team. I made such great friendships there, and I went dog sledding. It was so cool with my daughter. But it was really cool. We did some cool stuff out there in New England. And then I came back to California and took over. Raytheon was 4 companies. So I was managing 2, and I took over all 4. For their ops. Then my boss, Julie Parks, left to be the executive corporate director, and I took her job as the director about 3 years ago during the Raytheon, Pratt and Collins.
Yeah, Julie's very sharp.
Very sharp. She kept me on my toes. And she's very passionate, very passionate, loves compliance. Always, she used to tell me, Renee, we're not going to, because my big thing, I think, in this business is you know how to solve problems. When you're that's what you do is, you're a problem solver. But she used to tell me, well, you solve the problem and I'll fix the law.
There you go. Yeah.
There's an ops problem. Renee, you solve the problem. I'll fix the law. Okay. And she'd be out in front trying to change it.
Yeah. Cool. I have a lot of respect for Julie Parks. She's very, very sharp. So Julie, if you're listening to this, hello.
I asked her, I said, hey, we might have you on the show. She goes, oh yeah, I'd love to.
Oh, that'd be
nice.
Great. Oh,
yeah,
I'd love that.
To.
So, oh yeah. All right. So, as you're going through, did you wind up, it sounds like, all right, so you took over all 4 companies. So in a sense, you wound up probably taking on 4 different operating groups and tried to merge them into one.
Yeah. And we actually got it down to 2. It was tough because, we had missile systems, we had defense systems, we had satellites, so it was they all operated very differently. Same ERP, thank goodness. When I was at Teledyne, I think we had like 60 plus ERPs. So, that's the other thing that's really important is automation.
Oh my gosh. You had how many ERP systems?
60 plus. In Teledyne, we were acquisitioning 10 companies a year. It was total insanity. Right. Yeah. We would fly out to the company, and John Hayes and I, my buddy, he was my counterpart for export. We used to go and, sit there and go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Because they're not doing 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 6 months later, we're doing another company. And 3 months later, we're doing another company. And it was crazy.
All right. So with that, let me ask you a question then. It's like, there's a lot of folks that have gone through, mergers and acquisitions and from a company that's being bought to another company that's you're working for the company that's acquiring another company and all that. As you're going through with that and those different systems, what was your overall approach? I would think that you were trying to get your hands around even the data files so you could figure out what the heck was going on. That was a monumental task.
Oh, monumental. I mean, what I did was we did Amber Road actually at Teledyne. We brought in Amber Road from a classification perspective because, I try to focus on value, classification, origin. I mean, that's where I try to zero in on first. So you try to solve one mountain at a time. And so we brought in Amber Road. I think automation is the key when you have so many different operations and processes, and you have to just be patient, and it takes time for people to change. They talk about change management. That's the most difficult part, I think, is getting people to say, well, hey, I did it this way for 20 years. Yeah, I know, but let's do it this way, and then in the middle of all that, we're getting audited by customs, I try to mitigate. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. We had a Chapter 98 audit. It was the most insane thing. They were calling our suppliers. Customs was calling our suppliers, asking them. The guy who signed, they'd say, hey, let me talk to Renee Chiuchiarelli. That's my daughter. And then Nina would be like, oh, if they didn't answer the question right, they were in trouble. And so were we. So automation, change management, and actually getting people to buy in. You can't just shove it down their throat. They have to be involved in the meetings, be involved in the decision and the process, because if they're not, they generally won't use it.
You're hitting on some things, though. Let's back up a minute, because I for our listeners and whatnot, I would like to just stop for a second. Is that generally speaking, with what you've talked about, and you came in and in middle management, you're going through and dealing with those things. You're basically you're thrown to the fire, if you will, into the fire, if you will, of these acquisitions, because they're going on. The companies are moving. You're trying to deal with it. So with all that, but you're hitting on some things that I think are phenomenal. So here's the thing: you're talking about the change management. You're talking about being patient. You're talking about having a process management, where you're talking about, all right, well, you got to get out there and get the classification of the parts and things of that going with, because new parts are coming constantly. And if you're not classifying it ahead of time, it's going to bite you on the backside. So I was like, okay, so I picked up on that. So if you were to do it over again and go through that same pathway, what would be some of the things that you wish you could have done to prepare yourself? What kind of training, or what kind of courses, or what kind of things would you recommend for somebody to prepare them? Because this is basically what I was hearing, other than the classification scenario, is pretty much would apply to any job, is the skills and the knowledge of how to handle that change, or how to handle people's personalities and how to support them and not shove it down their throats. So what would you recommend? And I know that's probably quite a bit there, but I mean, what would you recommend for somebody to be successful, that if you had to do that again, what would have enabled your success even quicker than what it was?
That's a great question. There were so many times when we were on the phone with people or visiting them, and we wish we had more patience, like more likes, concerns. When you're sitting in a room and you're trying to get feedback from people, it takes a certain skill set. You don't just walk up and do that. So I would call it, I guess they call it change management, but it has a lot to do with how you deal with people, and how you take their feedback. How do you implement? How do you get them involved? I mean, that is a class in itself, I think, to your point. That's an awesome question, because that's what we're doing, is we're problem solving, dealing with people's ideas and emotions, and then making sure we're adding value for the company, right? I mean, that you got to balance. It's a balancing act. But to answer your question, I think it would be great to offer a class in change management that has to do a lot more with people skills, right?
Well, one of the things, let me offer this into our audience. I mean, one of the things I would like to ask, if y'all are listening to this, well, of course you're listening to it. Send us some notes on things that you would recommend, different courses. I would tell you right now, from a personal standpoint, based on what you just said, dealing with people, one of the best things, and I have no ties to the company or the program. I wish I did. But I've used it in excess of 20 years, and that's a program called DISC, D-I-S-C, and it's a personality assessment.
It's so funny you said that, because we did DISC at Raytheon, and we did Strength Finders, which was actually pretty cool too. A little bit, very similar. Yeah. And you know what's interesting? Yeah. You know what I'm thinking too is you're moving at a pace. The pace when you're working in this field, this arena, is phenomenal. I always found 33 years, my pace was phenomenal, and at every single job. And my friends would be like, maybe it's the business you're in. Maybe it's trade. I said, maybe it is.
Never a dull moment, because it's about the time you think things are fine, then, a war breaks out. Oh gosh. Or, a trade restriction
trade
comes
remedies.
into play. Or,
yeah. Yeah. And they're like, and it's funny because, you know what's funny? Oh my gosh, this is so great. This guy and I used to, Chris Garcia, actually, there's another Chris Garcia at Kuhn and Nagel. And I've known them for 20 years, him and Steve Kukta. And we went to some meetings, and people would ask us, this is not customs meetings, so what do you guys do for a living? And we'd say, oh, we're licensed customs brokers. And they'd say, what? You sell houses? And so then we finally just started telling people we were pharmacists. And they're like, oh, you're a pharmacist. And we'd say, yeah. But anyway, it's just because nobody knows what you're doing. And then finally, when the government started talking about different things, people started saying, oh, you do duties? So then it started to make sense the last 3-4 years. This is the first time in 3 or 4 years that people actually know what trade is. But the pace of this business is phenomenal. And I don't think people have time. See, what I would love is to take what like you said, Andy, DISC or Strength Finder or Problem, and actually allow people to use it a couple times a week. Application. When I was at HoMedics, I had a couple people that worked for me, Dee Dee, and she was new, and I would give them exercises a couple times a week for classification, just make crazy stuff up. And because if they didn't use it, you lose it, right? So to your point, yeah, you need time to use this stuff.
Let me ask you real quick, I guess, because you're kind of almost touching on that. And I guess kind of indirectly, Andy might have asked you, but I'll be more direct about it and stuff and ask you, as far as your career, like, traditionally, this career has been like a male-dominated career, and not so much now, like in the recent, I would say 3 to 5 years. Yeah, now it's about half and half, and it's ironically we get most of our attendees for our trainings are more female-dominated, but going through your career, I mean, that's only the last few years. I'm talking about, I mean, you said yourself 30 plus years in this business. Traditionally, having it been a male-dominated, career or business, how do you think, like, how did you make it to where you are? I mean, you literally broke
That's a great question. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I started out clearing trucks at the bridge. So, you know what's funny? My first job, my second job, the guy, one of the GMs said, hey, why don't you go do the dishes? And I said, well, Dan, the guy next to me, he can do the dishes. Because I was kind of a firecracker. My grandma went to college in 1914, right? Or something. And so she's always pushed me, to push the feminine, my opportunities. So he said, no, I need you to do them. So I did them. And then I went and told my dad, and my dad got me this sign. I don't know where he got it, but he said, take this to work. And it said, do your own dishes. I'm not your maid or something. And I put it on my desk. I mean, that was I thought a little assertive in 1991. But he never asked me to do the dishes again. And so, I mean, you guys can imagine, at that time I was using a telex machine. That's how old I am, for crying out loud. That's how we were communicating with
oh my gosh. Yes.
So I love you. I love what I get with young people. I'm like, hey, have you heard of a telex machine? No. But anyway, Lalo, back to so that was my introduction right into the world of business. And it pushed me actually to be a little more assertive about my career. And in fact, at Teledyne, I used to make jokes with the guy, John, I talked about, because he actually made a little more money than I did. And I had more years of experience. So it's still the disparage between women and men in general is still there. And you have to work a little harder. And sometimes, you know what I mean? And sometimes you don't. And if you have a great boss, which I've had several, those opportunities are easier, right? And I think the one thing I've tried to do is take care of women that work for me. I've tried to promote them and mentor them. And I think that's my job. That's one of the things I take very, very seriously, in fact, about, as a legacy. Was I able to help women to where they wanted to be? But it was tough. There were many situations throughout my career that I felt maybe I had to work a little harder, but I just kept doing it and kept my head down. Yeah. I was a single mother, and, my daughter was the one that drove me to just keep pushing.
Well, I will say one of the things that you just said, and this is, I think, vitally important. You took the time to try and mentor somebody, and that's one thing that I think is really good. And when you're leading a department, a lot of times you're so busy in the projects and your objectives for the year and the month and the quarters and all that, and you get wrapped up in a lot of things, and you can very easily fill up your calendar to the point where you're not stopping long enough to deal with somebody as an individual. You'll deal with them as a group or a department and all of that. You develop the things, and they make you so proud when you're able to say, they did the work, but I at least knew I had a little bit of part in that. Do you have some of those kinds of scenarios going on as far as your history?
Oh yeah. Raytheon had this mentoring program. Actually, you could log in and assign yourself, open yourself up to be a mentor or actually look for mentors. But there were a lot of times where I just had, definitely my staff, I met with them, most everybody weekly. But there were several people I took on to mentor, and in fact, Christine Hank, who worked for me, she went on to get her master's degree, and she was, the pace, as we said, was crazy. She was working a lot of hours, and she stuck to it and did it. And, she was my right. She really did a lot of great stuff. So, and to see her, flourish and bloom was awesome. So, and I have several people like that, like you said, that's like what I used to get out of ice skating. When you'd see someone land the jump, you'd be like, yes, they landed, and that's how you feel when, like you said, they get the degree, or all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and they like, oh yeah, I see I have to do an ITAR license and I can't do a carnet, and and they start getting it, and you're like, oh, cool. I love that.
I wish I can do more training. Obviously, we have to run the business, the business part of it. But yeah, when I was doing training or lectures or whatever, the case may be, yeah, you see that, and like you said, I used to have for fun. I used to do a summer camp for kids for coding. I used to teach them how to code.
Oh, and, that's cool.
Me and my yeah, so my kids and I, they were in high school, and so we decided, hey, let's do this for fun. So we used to do a summer camp for that, and oh my goodness, to see the kids really excited about that and moving forward with different ideas, and it's same concept, yeah. But you're right, what that is very rewarding. So.
You're going to be a great asset for the Global Training Center. But again, in looking at everything with your career thus far, and now you're going to get to do some things, I think it sounds like that, you're coming towards the end of your career. You're going to get to do some things that are a little bit more fun than what you probably had to. But any last minute Any last, main key recommendations again of what we've talked about for people that are, entering into the trade world, or probably even that middle management ranks that are trying to move up the ladder?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd say that you need some tactical experience. It's good to actually get in the weeds and do things, because you know how many times that saved me throughout my career is unbelievable, because I actually knew what happened when a carnet cleared. I knew I knew how, I mean, I had FDA lawyers calling me because we went through an audit at HoMedics with FDA, and they would be like, well, what happens with the PGA and the, when you actually understand the inner workings of trade, and like you said, you can't do everything. So you got to focus on a couple areas. But the tactical side to me is so important, because in the end, what you're doing is problem solving. I mean, we're not a profit center. I always wanted to become a profit center, but I couldn't figure out how. And the people, I think what you brought up, Andy, with DISC and the strength finders and, working on being able to communicate with people and, and problem solve and tactical. I think those are the big, another thing I used to do a lot of is just try to show some empathy. People are human, the bottom line is, I think we all want to be happy. That's, when we want to feel appreciated. So if you show empathy through your life and your career and your professional areas, I think people appreciate that and they listen.
Renee, thank you so much. I guarantee I'm looking forward to more conversations with you and as we move through this next chapter in your life, I guess, and as we're with the addition here. So
for everyone that's listening in, that Renee will be hosting a free webinar on second week in December. But look at the show notes, because on the show notes, there's a link there so you can go register for it. It's going to be a year in review type webinar. You can now do what I've always wanted to do, but I didn't have the bandwidth for it, and neither did Elsa. It's growing our trade community. So you're going to see a lot more on that. You're going to see hopefully a place where Andy and I have always wanted this as well, is a place where people can talk about our podcasts and be able to share more ideas and I know Renee is not a techie like where she's going to be programming that, but the problem is moderating that and keeping track with that. It's just so hard when you're busy, as Renee used to do, turning off fires in other areas, or trying to grow the business. So anyway, now with Renee, she can be our eyes and ears in those communities now and help us with that. So we're really excited about that. A lot more to come on that. And, we're just so happy again to have her and grow the resources available, not only to our clients at Global Training Center, but to the podcast audience as well. So we're really happy and excited about that. So
Lalo, thanks for having me. Thanks, Andy. It's been awesome.
Have a great day, and keep sharing our show and liking it and whatnot, and keep your eyes open for Renee. I think this is going to be a great addition.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.